We have a camo test here, and the camo patterns we'll be testing is British 95 Woodland, also known as Soldier 95, German Flecktarn, German Strichtarn, Polish Wz93 Camouflage, and Yugoslavian M89 Camouflage, also known as M93. I'll also be wearing British MTP trousers during all of these tests, and a multicoloured sort of woodland style mossy oak type headgear. All of these tests will have an up close photo, a further away photo, and then an even further back photo. I won't change position, but what you'll see is as the camera moves further out, you'll see how well the disruptive effects and the colour tones work. So first off, the Soldier 95 Woodland Camouflage. So this is kind of getting a bit too dark and green for this time of year, as we're getting into autumn now. And you'll see as it fades further out, this actually is quite disruptive. In this particular picture, the multicam or MTP trousers aren't as effective. However, in later pictures inside the woodlands, they become very, very effective. However, this 95 Soldier only really works on the outside of bushes at this time of year. Once you get further into the woodland, it appears to be far too dark for its surrounding areas, but in this test it performed fairly well. Now the East German Strichtarn, a particular favourite camouflage of mine. It doesn't have a disruptive pattern of sorts, so it loses a lot of points as you get further out, but Strichtarn is always very good at appearing to be a very similar colour to the environment, so it's sort of a much older version of multicam in a sense. You can wear it pretty much anywhere and it will be guaranteed to at least look somewhat like the colours of its surroundings. Now the Yugoslavian M89 or M93 camouflage. This is obviously designed for southeastern Europe, so using it here in the autumn in Britain it appears a bit too green and sort of bluish, but for the most part this is quite a nice woodland camouflage during the middle of summer here, but when you start using it in the autumn the colours are just far too green on it to fit in well. However, the disruptive pattern on it is still quite nice. Now for the Flecktarn, and this works really well here because the colour palette of the Flecktarn is very similar to the autumn leaves. It works better in autumn than summer. The disruptive pattern is also quite clever. As you move further away it doesn't look like dots and it ends up looking more like bigger splodges on the colour palette, which means it works really well as a camouflage. Now the Polish Wz93 Camouflage. This worked fairly well here on this jacket. As it gets further away, although it's a bit darker than the surrounding leaves, it does end up disrupting the shape very well, and you don't stand out at all really wearing this camouflage. As you can see here, it's sort of turning invisible. Now we're going to repeat the same tests again, but this time it's actually in some sort of sparse woodland where I'm standing at the edge of the woodland looking out. Now there's some greenery in front of me and some sort of brown colours around, and you'll see that the multicam trousers now, or the MTP, are doing a really good job at almost appearing invisible. It's hard to work out where my legs are in the faraway pictures, and the Strichtarn actually ends up working really well here because it looks like the exact same brown colour as the actual trees. With the Strichtarn I took one picture where I was crouched down in a moment, and you'll see that it actually, if you're taking a kneeling position with Strichtarn on, you suddenly become much harder to see, or with any camouflage, because you're hiding your shape far better. The Yugoslav camouflage actually worked fairly well here, simply because of the fact that there was a bit more greenery in front of it, so when it zooms out and then zooms back in, the multicam or MTP trousers work at hiding the legs, and the Yugoslav camo works at hiding the body from the greenery that's around it. Now again, the Flecktarn performs really well here, even though its colour palettes don't really match the vibrant greens in front of it. As it zooms further out, you'll notice that the Flecktarn gets harder and harder to spot, and the disruptive pattern comes through again, which means it really doesn't stand out in the environment. The Polish Wz93 camouflage does another thing similar. As you zoom further out again, the disruptive pattern really takes over and it becomes harder and harder to see the person standing there actually wearing the camouflage. Now for a similar test repeated in front of some trees that have fallen over with some dead leaves on them. This is quite good because I'm very close to something that's a similar colour to a lot of these camouflages. As you can see, when we get out here, the British DPM works really well, although it's a bit too dark at hiding my shape. The multicam also does exceptionally well in these pictures. And again with the Strichtarn, as you move further out, the colour seems almost identical to those around it, and you become really hard to see even when it's hidden in plain sight to an extent. Now here's a picture where I actually stood in front of the bush, and you'll notice that it's actually really hard to see me now with the Strichtarn on, even though I'm standing up straight because the colour is so close to the surroundings. The Yugoslav camo here is obviously far too green for its surrounding. The disruptive effects at least work a bit when you get further out, but for the most part you don't want a green sort of woodland camouflage when you're actually in autumn colour palettes, because it just won't do its job of hiding you. The Flecktarn again, as you would expect, works exceptionally well here, but also pay attention to my hood and the multicam or MTP trousers. As we get further away, those seem to basically disappear, and the Flecktarn is still the most noticeable thing. And again, the Polish Wz93 camouflage did exceptionally well here. As we get further out, the form becomes harder and harder to see because the disruptive pattern takes over. Now here's a picture of the Yugoslav camouflage in front of some actual greenery, just to test that it does work, and you'll see here why the colour palette of it isn't identical to the trees around it. As you get further out it does become a lot less noticeable, because it is in its element of colours it's meant to work with. Now here's a picture of all the camouflages laid out on the floor, and you'll notice that they actually all seem to be relatively the right colour when they're laid out on the floor, except the Yugoslav camouflage. Here's a picture of me with Strichtarn on, standing next to a tree. We repeat this with the Wz93 camouflage, where you notice when your shape isn't actually silhouetted how much better you disappear into the distance, which is something you need to bear in mind with all camouflages. It's partially down to how well the wearer is wearing them, not just the camo pattern. So if you hide your form well, the camo works far better than if you're standing out in the open and silhouetting yourself. I thought I'd just go back to this picture to demonstrate how well some camouflages can work at a distance, even if you're almost hidden in plain sight, where the camo disruptive pattern appears like everything around it, and it almost appears like you're just looking through something rather than seeing a person there. So if I was in a more hidden environment, I'd be pretty much impossible to spot with the human eye, especially if I was stood slightly behind a bush looking out rather than in front of a bush. So, as I said, it all goes to be how well you can actually hide with the camouflage on, but for the purpose of these tests I wanted to make sure I was actually quite visible so you could judge the camo on its own abilities and not, you know, how well the person's hiding behind a bush. I'd also like to thank Max for helping me take the photos where we went out and took the photos of all the camouflages. And I'd also like to point out that some of these camouflages, because they're quite old surplus, have been washed a lot of times and have faded naturally due to, you know, like dyes and sunlight and stuff. So some of these camouflages would be more or less effective when they were newer. Some of them would have been even darker colours that would have been less effective. Others have become a bit faded, all the colours appear a bit off, so they're less useful. So take everything with a pinch of salt. And as I said, if this was done more during the summer, not the autumn, the woodland camouflages would have been a lot more effective, but now the camos that have more browns and reds in them, like the Flecktarn, end up looking far better than the woodland camouflages do.